Hey folks, it's Jake Davis with my third and final video of the day, and this will be my top 5 video of the month, ranking down my top 5 favorite horror films of the decade of the 2000s. Films released between January 2000 and December 31st, 2009, the pop culture decade. Now, this is the fourth of a series of videos I started about 2 years ago. Did my top 5 videos of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. My number ones those decades were the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Reanimator, and Scream. Upon further review, I would probably actually now, upon revisiting both films since I did the video, I probably now would put The Thing above Reanimator. The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing with Kurt Russell is my number 2. But I think I'd put it number 1 now. And I've also mentioned many times that I deeply regret not having Reanimator. It had been so long since I'd seen Reanimator, and then when I went back and revisited Reanimator, I was like, Reanimator, Hellraiser. It had been so long since I've seen Hellraiser, I regret not going back and putting Hellraiser on the list. But, it is what it is, and maybe I'll revisit it eventually. But I did want to get it through 2000s, because I do think the 2010s was actually a phenomenal decade for horror movies. Kind of unappreciated. Lots of great movies. The 2 It movies, Ready or Not, Doctor Sleep, The Babadook, Insidious, The Cabin in the Woods, The Conjuring, with some good fun. The Wolfman remake that I loved. I don't give a fuck if you liked it. I loved it. There were some good horror movies in the 2000s, in the 2010s. Don't Breathe, 10 Cloverfield Lane. I mean, there were some good damn horror movies that decade. There really were. That'd be a good fun horror movie decade to go through. But the 2000s weren't. I felt like I was obligated to go through this decade first. I don't want to. I really don't want to. Oh, fuck. Man, there was bad. Between the 10 years, so the best horror movies of the 2000s. Between 10 years, I saw 260 theatrically released horror movies. And even after narrowing that down to 25 best movies, there was still just total shit to choose from, man. Utter trash. It was the whole decade was broken down into genres. You had remakes, gore porn, found footage, and what was the fourth one I'm looking for? Ghost house movies. It's just everything was the same this decade, and it got so generic and so repetitive. Nevertheless, I was able to five-ish really good horror films to talk about. So let's talk about the 5 best horror films of the 2000s. Number 5, Sweeney Todd and the Demon Barber of Fleet Street from 2007, directed by Tim Burton, starring Johnny Depp, Helena Bonham Carter, and her intelligence, Alan Rickman, and Timothy Spall. Oh, and Borat, Sacha Baron Cohen's in this too. This is, of course, a musical comedy horror modernization, the supposedly true story of Sweeney Todd. They still claim Sweeney Todd's a true story, but I don't know if I buy it. I think most of this legend is probably bullshit at this point. But I would also recommend, if you haven't seen it, it's much easier to get a hold of this film. But if you haven't seen the film from the 1930s starring Todd Slaughter, please go out of your way to try to find that movie. It's in public domain. You could probably find it if you look in the DVD section, if there is one. You could probably find it for like 50 cents at your local Walgreens. I mean, look for it. Look for it. Seriously, it is great. But the whole story here is a barber who was wrongfully imprisoned and deeply wronged by a politician, by a judge, years later, decades later, 20 years later, comes back to London seeking vengeance. He hooks up with a starving pie shop lady who has a room at the top, and she offers him, basically they come up with a scheme that he is going to open a barber shop. He's going to start murdering his customers, and she's going to cook the meat for her meat pies, while he slowly tries to lure in the judge for his vengeance. And yeah, it's a musical. It's full with terrific scores by songs by Stephen Sondheim, and it features an Academy Award nominated performance by Johnny Depp and Academy Award winning art direction, which I mean, like, seriously, 8 times out of 10, if Tim Burton directed the movie, it won the Oscar for art direction, in all honesty. Number 4, Saw from 2004, directed by James Wan, starring Cary Elwes, Lee Whannell, Tobin Bell, Monica Potter, and Danny Glover. Oh man, what's the other guy's name? Michael, was it Elrich? Fuck, I can't remember his name now. He played, he was also like the leader of the others on Lost, and a brilliant voice performance in Batman: The Dark Knight Returns animated films. But he plays the decoy Jigsaw in this film. Jigsaw, of course, a legendary film featuring, holy shit, it's 8 sequels. 8 sequels this movie has. But Saw is a story of a serial killer who basically sets up traps to trick or manipulate his victims into killing themselves. I've never killed anybody. You know, fuck you. But what really holds the original Saw movie, because a lot of people forget the original Saw film was a bit more of a whodunit, and it had a it had like a micro budget. It had like no money. They couldn't afford city streets and sidewalks. They couldn't afford to shoot a single scene of this film outside. You don't see sunlight this whole goddamn movie. Which also adds to the kind of claustrophobic, captivated experience of the film, too, to be honest. But, I mean, I don't want to give away spoilers if you've never seen it, but you know, Tobin Bell is Jigsaw. He is a serial killer. He's a monster. And, often even the people who survive his traps kind of get caught up in the cult of Jigsaw. And it kind of kicked off this kind of fascinating, to a degree great, but kind of stupid film franchise that kept going through the entire decade. Every Halloween we had a Saw movie. But to me, the first 2 were the best. And I actually had a problem differentiating it between this one and the first one. I had no problem with that with another series I'm going to talk about next. But I had to go with the original one because of the shock of the ending and the performance of both Cary Elwes and Monica Potter. I've always felt like she was a bit unappreciated in this film, to be honest with you. Touchdown. Oh, wow. I had that way too loud. Number 3 is House of 1,000 Corpses. I was really torn between this one and The Devil's Rejects. Didn't really know which one to do, but eventually decided to go with House of 1,000 Corpses for a couple of different reasons. I prefer the use of music. I like the more obscure, slightly unknown use of pop music and original music as well, opposed to general kind of southern rock radio hits like the ones we would hear from Lynyrd Skynyrd and the Allman Brothers, like we heard in Devil's Rejects. I love the color scheme, the EC Comics blue and red, bright, piercing colors. And there's also, how can I put it? The supporting characters, Leslie Easterbrook, I have no problem with her. She's terrific in Devil's Rejects, and she's great in the Police Academy movies, but she wasn't Karen Black. I thought it would have been... I would have rather her character just get killed off in the opening sequence than them recasting her, you know what I mean? And then there's the trying to make the Fireflies more sympathetic, which the same problem I had with Don't Breathe sequel that I reviewed earlier today. These people are monsters, they're serial killers. Why am I supposed to be rooting for them? The Groucho Marx scene, you boys ain't planning on fucking these chickens now, is ya? Is the single funniest scene in a horror movie you will ever see. I would bet you. I would donate a pint of blood to your nearest, most desperate relative. But that's not the funniest scene you've ever seen in a goddamn horror movie. But yeah, I have to go with House of a Thousand Corpses, you know, not to mention the great Tom Towers and Walton Goggins, and the character of Otis Driftwood is far more sinister and evil in the first film. Is it just me or they just totally forgot that he was albino by the time we got to the sequel? I just think the first movie is all around the superior movie when it comes to rewatchability. Also helps that it's not over 2 hours long. Anyhow, number 2 is a tie. I'm going to have both Shaun of the Dead and Slither. Because you see, the bulk of the good horror movies of the 2000s were horror comedies. And that was the problem. And I didn't want to have two spots taken up by horror comedies, but I was not going to deny Slither because it's straight up one of my favorite films of the entire decade. Of course, Shaun of the Dead is a comedy British reimagining of, you know, the George Romero horror movies. Basically, this loser who's on such a mundane, repetitive, do the same thing every day way of living, that's not till 11 o'clock in the afternoon on a fucking Sunday that he realizes that, oh yeah, the zombies have taken over the entire goddamn city. Peg is great in it. Nick Frost should have been nominated for a goddamn Oscar for it, as should the script for original screenplay, and even the editing, for that matter. Shaun of the Dead is a classic. There's nothing. I mean, if you've never seen it, goddamn it, go out and see it. It's been praised, it's been loved. There's whole goddamn essays about this movie on YouTube. I don't need to talk about it anymore. But I do want to talk about Slither. Slither was a little movie that in 2006 it was made for about $30 million by James Gunn. And it was such a fucking disaster. And Universal Pictures broke James Gunn's balls over the descent of this film so much. Over the next few years, James Gunn went through a divorce with his wife at the time, Jenna Fisher, and he also had said he was quitting movies altogether. And you know, I thought it was awful. This is so sad. This guy was so talented. I loved his scripts for the Scooby-Doo movie, and I loved his script for Dawn of the Dead remake, and I loved Slither. It was a brilliant movie. And then he does Super, and then holy shit, it's announced he's going to make Guardians of the Galaxy. And as soon as he was announced for Guardians of the Galaxy, I remember just going, they got something now. You know, it doesn't matter if they don't have character name brand characters, even comic book fans, everyday comic book fans like myself enjoy or even know. They have a director that is special, can do something intriguing. And his new movie, the Suicide Squad, is terrific, but I do want him to go back to horror. I'd love to see him make another horror film. Michael Rooker is Grant. Greg Henry is the foul-mouthed, abusive mayor. Martian is the general term for outer space, fucker. Look it up. I love it. And of course, Nathan Fillion as Bill Party. I wasn't really aware at the time. I mean, I was aware of Firefly, but I didn't know anything about the show. I don't think I'd seen the Serenity movie yet. My first exposure to Nathan Fillion was as the hero, Sheriff Bill Party. And Slither, and he was terrific. And I love Slither. It is a celebration of 80s horror movies, but at the same time, something completely insane and in and of itself at the same time. And my number one best horror film of the 2000s, I decided to go with a dark horse, which is Joyride from 2001, directed by John Dahl, and starring Ted Levine, Luke, Paul Walker, Steve Zahn, and Lily Sobieski. This is a story of two brothers while on a road trip through Wyoming. Play a prank on some truckers that goes way, way too far. I don't know why I really lean towards Joyride. Joyride's always kind of been this unappreciated gem to me. I know there were sequels. I don't give a shit about the sequels. Joyride is a classic. It's a great movie. Great performance. I love the use of introducing and developing characters you care about and not making a movie that leans on killing them off. You know what I mean? The growing tensions between the brothers throughout the course of the film and humiliation games. No one else could have played the main character. Lewis, I believe his character's name was, played by Paul Walker. He was absolutely perfect in that role. Not only did he, the girl voice, Sugar Cane, whatever his name was, and pretending to be a hooker on the comms, but he really did come off as a bit of an innocent being dragged along on this hurtful game. And then there's Ted Levine's voice performance as Rusty Nail, kind of iconic and unforgettable. When I first saw this film, I was actually in Wyoming at the time. It was literally just a few days after me and my dad and a friend of ours, a deceased, very dear friend of ours, were on a road trip and our car had broken down. And this couple had taken us in. They took us into our home. The first night they let us camp out in the yard. The second night they took us into the damn home. And we crashed in their house on their couches, and then we set up tents nearby, a campground. But it was, good people out there in Wyoming. There really were. I would have died if it wasn't for the good people I met out there during that time. But the reason I bring it up is I first saw the movie that second night. They just rented it. We were sitting there watching it with it, and when it was over, we all enjoyed it. I had mentioned I thought it was a really good horror movie, a smart horror movie, and the woman told me, that's not a horror movie. I was like, well, yeah, it is a horror movie. Horror movie is more about art, atmosphere and all this kind of shit. And me being this opinionated movie freak teenager, my dad just kind of had to grab my arm and was like, look, no, shut the fuck up. Don't get into a stupid argument over nothing with this woman when she's taking us in. We're total strangers. She's going to throw us out. But yeah, I don't know, maybe it's because of a sympathetic thing because I saw it when I was in Wyoming during this very influential period of my life. Kind of changed my perspective on not so much the world, but on people, on humanity. But yeah, I'm going to go with Joyride for number one. And I just want to say one more thing too. If you live in Wyoming, you're from Wyoming, you've been to Wyoming, you're watching this video, those are good people. Salt of the earth. God bless them. I'm Jake Davis. I hope y'all love my Tupac shirt. I love this Tupac shirt. This is actually a gift from my cousin Chuck back in the day. I'm Jake Davis, and I'll catch you on the fly.